Hey guys, welcome back. So we are up to our second video in our series on the Cold War today. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at this topic of resistance in Eastern Europe and the development of nuclear weapons. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually divide those topics into two separate videos. So in this first video, we're only going to focus on resistance in Eastern Europe. And then the next video, we're going to focus more on the development of new nuclear weapons. So let's get into this topic and talk a little bit about Eastern European resistance to communism. So let's get kind of the lay of the land here. Once again, we're talking about the Iron Curtain, this metaphorical dividing line between the communist world and the non-communist world. And some of these countries behind the Iron Curtain didn't really want to be communists, or if they did, they wanted to do it their own way, not the Soviet way. And so there's going to be a fair amount of resistance behind the Iron Curtain. Let's look at Germany first. So the two Germanys that come out of World War II are very, very different. Western Germany is democratic. It is capitalist. It is increasingly free, more free and more prosperous than Eastern Germany. And before you know it, a lot of East Germans are thinking, man, I want to get out of this Germany. I want to go to the better Germany. I want to go to West Germany. And so what they would do is they would go to West Berlin. Remember, West Berlin is that little island of Western way of doing things. It's that little island of capitalism and democracy and the sea of communism. If you can make it to that city, to the West Berlin, you can then go anywhere you want in the world, including West Germany. And this evacuation, this flight of East Germany, of East Germans into West Germany was a huge embarrassment for the East German government and an embarrassment for the Soviets, because people are voting with their feet, right? They're leaving the communist world and going to the capitalist world. And that is something that communists say can't happen, that, communism is this utopia. So why would people be going the other way? So if you're East Germany and you've got to stop this flow of East Germans into West Berlin, the way you do it is by building a wall. The Berlin Wall, die Berliner Mauer, as the Germans would have called it. So this is their solution to the problem of this flight of East Germans. Build a wall to keep the people in. And construction begins in August of 1961 with no warnings. So this thing goes up. Now, at first, it's kind of a temporary structure of barbed wire and armed guards, but then the bricks come in and you've got a wall going up. So this is a big, big deal. Now, officially, this wall was built to keep people out of East Germany. They called it the Anti-Fascist Barrier. In other words, they believed, at least from their propaganda anyways, this wall was not to keep East Germans in. No, not at all. Rather, it was a wall to keep all the people out of this utopia that is East Germany. Here's a famous picture of an East German border guard defecting to West Berlin. And yeah, he's getting out while he still can. So all told, this wall will stretch 87 miles around West Berlin. So it's basically just a wall around West Berlin. And it's more than just a wall. You've got armed guards, you have landmines, you have barbed wire, searchlights, attack dogs. I mean, this is a very serious fortification, really, is what this is. Again, it's a wall to keep the people East Germany in East Germany from getting to West Berlin. There's a kind of cross-section of the Berlin Wall towards the east, towards rather the end of the Berlin Wall, what it looked like kind of in the final phase, because it went through different stages of development. This is kind of the final version right here. So over the years, some 5,000 people were able to escape across the wall by different methods, but over 100 were killed in their attempt. And this is obviously something very sad, that Germans who are willing to risk their life to get across the Berlin Wall, they risked death. I mean, the border guards were ordered to shoot to kill to keep these people inside East Germany. You can see some people escaping, I guess, across the zone right there. So this wall becomes a symbol. It's a symbol of what the Cold War is all about, the struggle between the democratic world and the communist world. It's a struggle between our way of life and their way of life. There's a fair amount of irony that the communist world claims to be this utopia, and yet they literally have to wall their people in. That's really hard to figure out how that works from the communist perspective. There's JFK, and there's Ronald Reagan paying a visit to the Berlin Wall. Now, on the west side of the wall, of course, people were free to go right up to the wall and graffiti it and whatever else, take pictures next to it or whatever. But East Germans would, of course, never been able to get that close to their wall. So that's, again, the free world and the not free world. Here's a picture from back in the Cold War days. Picture from the modern day, when the Cold War is long over and the Berlin Wall is now just a memory. Back in the old days, modern day, right? All right. Let's get into some other countries, how they're trying to resist communism. We're going to go to Hungary next, right there. So in October of 1956, protests started to break out all across Hungary. And they're there to protest the Soviet-controlled government of Hungary, this communist government that was oppressive. And this turns into a full-fledged revolt where you have members of the Hungarian army joining up with the protesters. They're seizing control of equipment. They're seizing control of government buildings. Protesters are, they're protesters, so what they've done is they've cut out the communist symbol and the Hungarian flag. They're taking out their anger on monuments. And the leader of the Hungarian government at this time was a communist named Imre Nagy. And while he was a communist, he also realized that his people wanted more freedom. And so he says, we're going to have free elections. He tells the Soviets to withdraw their troops. You're not welcome in Hungary any longer. So he really is throwing down a big challenge to the Soviet way of doing things in Eastern Europe. Now, the Soviet government really decides they can't let Hungary do what they want, because if they let Hungary do what they want, well, you know what's next. Then it'll be East Germany, and then it'll be Romania, and then it'll be all these other countries that will fall apart. So you have to hold the line, the Soviets decide. And the way they're going to do this is through force. So in November of 1956, Soviet tanks roll into Hungary. It's an invasion. It's basically one communist country invading another. And Hungarian rebels fight back, but they're outgunned and overwhelmed. And in the end, they are unsuccessful, and the Soviets recapture Hungary. A pro-Soviet government is reinstalled. Imre Nagy is whisked away to the Soviet Union, where he would later be executed. All right, now let's go to Czechoslovakia. So 12 years after the Hungarian uprising, Czechoslovakia begins to test waters, see how much more freedom and democracy they can have. Their leader was Alexander Dubeck. Now, Dubeck was, again, he's a communist. He's not turning his back on communism and socialism. Rather, he wants a friendlier, freer version. He called it socialism with a human face. So again, he's not calling for the end of communism. He's calling for a nicer version of communism, a freer version of communism. And this period where his more liberal reforms were put into place is known as the Prague Spring. Okay, Prague, of course, the capital city of Czechoslovakia. And spring is a metaphor, right? It's rebirth, renewal, a new way of doing things, and that's what's happening in Czechoslovakia. Now, the Soviet government decides, well, we can't let this happen, right? Even though they're not rejecting communism, any modification at all in the Soviet version of communism was seen as dangerous and would spread across Eastern Europe. So, once again, the Soviet Union invades one of their allies. This is going to be Soviet soldiers and other troops from the Warsaw Pact are going to invade Czechoslovakia and crush the so-called Prague Spring. You see when these protesters on the Soviet tank here, but in the end they're going to be overwhelmed. And the poster at the top, the cartoon at the top rather, is very interesting, because what you have is, in 1945, the people of Czechoslovakia were welcoming the Red Army, the Soviet Army, as liberators because they're kicking the Nazis out. But by 1968, that same army comes to represent death and destruction. All right, so guys, that is our talk about Eastern Europeans resisting communism unsuccessfully, right? East Germany, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, all three of these are going to be put back into line by the Soviet Union. We also looked at the construction and purposes behind the Berlin Wall. In our next video, guys, we're going to talk about how nuclear weapons were developing and getting ever more dangerous during the Cold War.